Hello, and welcome to the very first podcast of Truth and Wholeness. My name is Dr. Albert LaChance, and I'm an author and a student of Pierre de Chardin and Thomas Berry. And I've met these two friends of mine here who are helping me to reach you, to reach you in a way that I feel impelled to do because of the nature of what I know is going on with the planet and with the overall lack of mental and spiritual health of our culture. Before I do any series with any name on them, I always try to dedicate the series to some person who I believe, if they were with us, would be operating right along here with me, and in some fashion actually is operating right here with me. And that person that I'm dedicating Truth and Wholeness to is Jared William Jacobson, and he is remembered as a gentle giant, a loving soul, a friend to all creatures, and most importantly, with a sense of humor that will never be forgotten by those who knew him. And so there it is. We're off and running on this thing. This will appear, I'm told now, as a podcast and on YouTube. And I don't know how that happens. I don't know much about any of the technology that makes this possible, but I know a whole lot of things that are invisible. And so when we put together what it is I know and the people who can help me get it out there to you, I'm able to make this appeal to you, not really from my heart only, but from my soul. I have been touched deeply by the people who have led me to the understanding I have. Excuse me. And that understanding is what I set out to to arrive at during the 60s. And here we are already past the 90s, and I have managed to arrive at the place that I sought to arrive at, which I call Unitive Psychology. But I also call myself, as very recently I came up with this idea. My teacher, Thomas Berry, called himself an ecologian. And I've realized yesterday, and I think it was him whispering from eternity, I realized that what I really am is a psychologian, Psychelogian. And that best describes what I'm hoping is a new field that takes in unitive psychology and unitive spirituality. But all of that is beyond the scope of today. What I'm doing with you today, or what I hope to do with you today, is to appeal um, in the name of the planet um, and in the name of your lives, along with the friend that we just talked about, to come to realize the danger that all of evolution is in. It's an unprecedented moment as far as we can tell. And that word is a burnout word too, precedented, unprecedented. We hear it all the time. The next mass murder is unprecedented. But the fact is, the United Nations, in lieu of any real import from the churches, I think, have failed terribly in this regard because this is the moral issue of all moral issues. This is about the shutting down of life on the earth, possibly permanently, from what Thomas Berry called the bomb below, which is what I'm going to be focusing on today, which is the destruction of the life systems, habitats, and creatures of Earth, and the bomb above, which is the nuclear possibility that could incinerate the biosphere of the planet and leave this beautiful, lush, flowing planet a silent stone going around the sun without one bird singing. And these are not empty threats. Only a fool like our president presently would make a joke or tinker with for political purposes to appeal to others, would toy with the life of the planet itself and toy with the signs that are presenting themselves to us more and more and more close to a daily basis, let alone the actual psychological breakdown in the human, which is part of it. That's the thing that has to be grasped, that if we look at the new cosmology as a whole, we come to a place where out of no thing there emerges something, and it's unpoetically called the Big Bang. But what it really is the flaring forth of consciousness. That's really what it is. It's the fire of consciousness. It's the unseen light that is below the light that we can see. And it's called cosmos, which means order. Cosmos means order in Greek. So this cosmos emerges, and the fire, the energy, cools and becomes the primordial matter, hydrogen and helium, out of which an entire cosmos emerges as galaxies, stars, planets, moons, asteroids, everything that we know of as cosmos, and then ultimately life itself, the emergence of early life, unicellular life, and then we go to the higher forms of life that lead ultimately to primates, and then the human. Most complex structure in the universe is the human brain. And that brain enables us to be something of a periscope on the planet that we can kind of rise out of through thought and consciousness. We can rise out of the rest of the cosmos and understand that we are the cosmos looking at itself. And as we look now, the temptation is to ignore what we see. But the United Nations, not the United Churches, not the United Psychologists, none of the United anythings or anyones, but the United Nations itself, only a couple of 3 months ago announced that we have about 12 years until the life systems of the planet turn from creative to catastrophic. And I'm not exaggerating. This is not hyperbole. I've taken the time, I promise you. For 50 years, I've been doing this one thing, trying to understand. And now I do understand. So then, only days ago, maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks, the United Nations came out again and said definitively, we're going to lose 1 million species from the web of life presently. And you kind of have to multiply that at least 3 times because of predation, the need for the species that feed upon those that are disappearing, and the other species that won't arrive here because of it. In other words, speciation itself will be replaced by extinction. And where that stops, we don't know. But there was one terrible moment that I had with Thomas Berry in New York, and it was on St. Patrick's Day, and I believe it was 1989. And we're sitting there eating our lunch together at the Broadway Diner. And I had been in awe of him since I met him. I really came in humble and really realized that I'm not his peer. And that at that time, he was about the age I am now, a little bit older. Um, so we're sitting there eating our St. Patrick's Day dinner. And at one point, I asked him, I said, Father Thomas, um, is there any good news? I'd been listening to him since 1985, and in the end, I would be with him till the end of 1990. And he put down his fork and he looked at me and he said, no. Now, at that time, I'm a guy with two little girls back home in New Hampshire. And I'm thinking to myself, no, what am I doing? I mean, why am I here doing this, driving back and forth to New York, if there's no reason for hope? So I just decided I was going to hope. That what else could I do? I had those two little girls. I had to do something. And I remember Caldecott was her name. Forget her first name. Helen Caldecott of Physicians for Social Responsibility had said something equally eerie early on, maybe in the 70s, somewhere in there. She was the head of Physicians for Social Responsibility, and she was talking about the nuclear threat between the then Soviet Union and the United States. And she said this, she said, what is the point in giving our children the best foods on earth, the best dentistry on earth, the best medicine on earth, the best education on earth, if we're just going to incinerate them? That reached me. That reached me. And here we are again with the planet. And Thomas Berry, what he said to me, he said, in 30 years, the planet will devolve down to the level of the microbes. And he said, barring nuclear war, the microbes will be life on Earth. And he said that there's no way that evolution will repeat the same series of triumphs that it did. Now, his teacher, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, was actually our joint teacher. It's why I found Thomas Berry. I'd been studying de Chardin since 1973, and for the same reasons. And he told me then that in 30 years, which is 2019 now, that this rollback would take place. I've recently been reading the entire corpus again of Teilhard de Chardin, and he announced it in 1934. He said the same thing, that if we are going to remain here, we have to choose between suicide and worship. So what I'm trying to do is, in a world of liars and lies, there's no reason for you to believe me unless you sense my sincerity. In a world of liars, and now having the most powerful liar in the world, we have to hear day by day. I heard somewhere that he's just passed his 10,000th lie, documented lie. somebody on CNN. It would be funny if it wasn't so sad and so horrifying. I'm asking you to let me speak to you about the relationship between truth and wellness, and that, excuse me, truth and wholeness. And that is what this whole series will be about. I'll give you as much information as I can. I'll quote books and tell you who wrote them. Um, but underneath it all, there's a fact that you have to know about me right away to understand my sincerity. Yes, I'm a doctor. Yes, I've studied with two of the greatest minds on the planet. Yes, all of that stuff is true. But what's really true and part of the answer to wholeness is my name is Albert and I'm an alcoholic. That has to be taken in. And the reason I want you to take it in is that I'm 41 years sober at the time of this presentation. I'm in my 41st year of sobriety. That means no alcohol, no drugs, including open heart surgery and open back surgery, followed only by Tylenol and ibuprofen. So I've been clear for a very long time. And I've come to see that one of the great gifts that God has given us at this very dangerous time is the work of Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and therefore the founder of all the other fellowships that have emerged from Alcoholics Anonymous. One of our biggest problems as a culture is that we're loaded on everything that you can take in on orally, through the veins, or any other entry point. We're a nation of drunkards. And now, I ran for office a few years back, and I was warned by this guy who was supposedly heading my campaign and all of the politics in the small town in New Hampshire that I live in. Not to talk about, he knew he knew I had had a practice in addiction for 30 years or so. And he didn't want me to talk to the citizens about it because he didn't want to upset them. Well, I did pretty well given who I am. My somewhat indifferent attitude to my campaign. I did pretty well. I did about 80% of the guy I ran against, but I didn't win. And so I didn't have the chance. Now, but at this point, the great opiate uh, problem had not yet fully surfaced. I had been already running around to the hospitals in New Hampshire, in the churches, warning that there's going to be a massive class action suit. You guys better wake up. And I had a packed audience in a little theater at the Elliott Hospital in Manchester. And they were all doctors and nurses. And it was more than being interested in hearing what I had to say, I promise you. It was called fear. Fear. Because they know it was coming. And it's here. And the death rate is out of control. And if I could have had that one victory politically, I would have been in the New Hampshire House long before the worst of this took place. But because I was controlled, as was Albert Gore, by people who really didn't understand what he understood or what I understood, that opportunity passed us by. We would have been the first state in the union, if I had my way, to start dealing with the problem way back. So that's what you need to know about me to know what it is I'm doing. And from this point on, I'm going to be trying to convince you that our only hope of wholeness is truth. Truth, facing truth. And that's what makes Bill Wilson such a huge presence in my mind, because not only did he provide us with a methodology for coming to wholeness, but in his step 3 and step 12 of the 12-step format, there is a line at the end of each of those, and it reads, God as we understand God, which means suddenly now we have the opportunity for truth in all the cultures of the world if we only could stop arguing with each other, sometimes and too often at the point of a gun. So that's what this is going to be about. That's the introduction, and I will go in further on the next installment of it. And these will be about a half hour or so each, and you can find them on YouTube or the podcast. And the podcast will be Truth and Wholeness, with some kind of digital something or other at the end, .com, right? .zebra, .watermelon, or whatever. It'll be there. If you just Google Dr. LaChance, Albert LaChance, and this title, Truth and Wholeness. So for now, thank you, and I hope we've got something going here in terms of trust to move forward, all of us into the future. Blessings.